Okay, Rebecca, we are now on episode three, where, I think this is like the piece de resistance when it comes to topic, overcoming self-criticism and perfectionism, which is actually a very common, what we call, disease in our industry, particularly the business event industry. And I remember when we were sort of like organizing to kickstart one of our brands, and one of my business partners said, "Oh my God, you are such a perfectionist." And I was horrified when I heard that comment, because I just instantly hope that, first of all, I didn't come across as I was expecting that of others, even though I know that I'm really tough myself. And I do criticize myself quite heavily at certain points in time. So why do we go through that?
Yeah. Well, I think the reality is it's about getting results, and I think like most things, there are sliding scales. You'll have some people who are, a little bit self-critical, and then you'll get people who are supersonically self-critical, and like there's always a spectrum, right? So I'd say, like in the first case, if you're a little bit self-critical, you'll say things like, that wasn't great, that wasn't the best thing that I've just done, whatever it is. And then you go all the way to the other end, where it becomes again about a self-worth thing, like that wasn't good enough, therefore I'm not good enough. That's the kind of the two ends of the spectrum. It becomes a very personalized experience at the other end. And I think the thing that's important to note, because it's really what you just said just then around, it kind of driving you to create outcomes. So I don't know about you, but when I was a kid, certainly, I was, an A-star kind of student. I was real high achiever, and I had systems in place to make that happen at school. I was like, I would be very, very proactive with my revision. I would have color-coded, schedules on my wall. And that was my kind of definition of success. This is how I create a successful outcome.
Wow.
So you kind of learn, I think a lot of people get into that sort of space as kids, that this is how you produce a positive outcome. And it kind of goes into life, right? You're like, well, this is the only way I know to create the perfect outcome. And it's to work really hard. It's to kind of work harder than anybody else. It's to dot every I, it's to cross every T. But the thing that I've really realized in my adult life is there are massive costs associated with that. There's obviously the burnout cost, because you're kind of just totally fixated on that outcome. But you also, I've seen this in myself, but I've also seen it in numerous clients where they've said, because I'm so in this detail and I'm sort of stuck here in this space, I'm seeing everybody else excelling around me. I'm seeing other people being promoted around me because I really want to do the best job I can possibly do. And their good enough is actually getting them promoted. And there's a lot of envy with that, right? There's a lot of jealousy and confusion. It's just like, I don't get it. I thought you had to be an A-star student, because that's what I've been told for my entire life, to kind of get ahead in life. But the reality is, in corporate world, that's not necessarily the case. And doing a good enough job is often good enough to keep moving. And I think the thing is so super interesting about perfectionism is we associate, if you're a perfectionist or a recovering perfectionist, as I describe myself as, if you're a recovering perfectionist, you have this view that the kind of high results and the high expectations are actually the right outcome. But I think the truth is that, being left behind, it means that you're kind of constantly falling short of those expectations. And then that creates more doubt about what you're supposed to be doing. It's a really weird sort of double-edged sword, if you like.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I think that often than not, after a while, we are so in our own zone, we start to alienate people. I mean, I've lost a couple of relationships because, my focus on work has become an excuse, which is such a dangerous zone to be in. And so are you able to share some of the solutions around, not being overly critical of ourselves, and, what is, why we shouldn't do perfection?
Yes. Well, I think your point earlier about relationships is a really important one, because I think when you have quite an extreme sense of perfectionism, you tend to have that value deeply within you, and you use that as your means to make decisions. And we also use it as our means to judge other people. So if you're in a situation where you're a perfectionist, but the people around you are not, they're always going to fall short of your expectation of what's good enough or what's acceptable. And that can cause massive problems in relationships. You know, if that person just doesn't hold that value too, then you're always setting high expectations for them, and you're always going to set them up to fail. And they're always going to feel like they're failing to be around you, which causes that kind of disconnect, if you like. But I think how you talk to yourself is part of the problem too. Because if you think about it, if you're a kind of a really strong perfectionist, you won't talk to yourself with love and care. You'll talk to yourself with sort of a scathing, blaming self-criticism. You know, why haven't you done that yet? And you've done all of those things, but why haven't you still done those things as well? There's still those other things you need to do. And you still need to do these 120%. It's not a kind of a loving, unconditional love that's there. And I think that's the difference between being at the other end of the spectrum, where you're just a little bit self-critical and you have a much more responsible approach to it. So not only do you say, okay, that wasn't quite good enough, you also say, what could I do to fix it? But it's a very kind of depersonalized way of looking at it. You're not saying, oh, you're the worst, you're not good enough because you haven't achieved the outcome to the highest possible standard. You're just saying, okay, well, what can I do to fix it? What can I do to make it a little bit better? That's obviously a lot more healthy to be in that space. You don't have that sort of issue of burnout, and you don't have that sort of analysis paralysis that you get into with perfectionism, because you just sort of stagnate. That's the irony, I think, with perfectionism. You think you're excelling when you're doing the perfectionist kind of streak, but actually you're stagnating. You're actually sitting still, procrastinating, doubting, doing an analysis on what could be better, when the people around you are doing good enough and progressing.
And what else could we do to resolve that, I guess, mental battle?
Yes, it is a mental battle. I think that the concept of personalization is very important. So I think perfectionists tend to personalize things. So it becomes all about me. So you get some negative feedback, for example, it's sort of seen as a kind of a criticism, if you like, of you rather than of the work. It's a criticism of you personally, which cuts much deeper, of course. So I think you can kind of get into this sort of habit, if you like, of saying, okay, this isn't actually about me. This is about something else. It's about something I can fix. I am the same person, whatever happens, but I can change an outcome. I can change some work that I've done. I can change some of my behavior, perhaps, to make it different or better and make the outcome better. But I think you've got to get out of this habit of taking it very personally and saying, oh, I'm not good enough. Because the work's not quite good enough, I'm not good enough. I think that's the massive, massive attitude game changer for perfectionists to get into. Absolutely. Where you suddenly realize, actually, it's not actually about me.
Yeah, actually, you've just shined a bright light on that topic, because in the business events industry, we are all about passion, because obviously we are not our industry is not the best payers as compared to banking or medical world. And I feel that because of that word passion, often it leads to quite a lot of misunderstanding and where you draw the line to protect your own personal well-being. And one of the things that I've learned over the years when it comes to balancing that passion statement is really about being conscious of my body language, because when I'm criticizing myself, obviously I won't be happy. And I suddenly realized that people around me, my loved ones, are quite quiet. And so I become quite conscious over the years whenever it's suddenly, when I walk into a room, it's sort of like you can use a knife to cut the tension. And I thought that I've offended them. So half the time I went into that further self-criticism and said, oh, look at what you've done now, and so forth, until someone came to me and say, it's not about you apologizing. It's more about us feeling helpless around you. We don't know how to help you to resolve that, because you're having this internal conversation that we don't know what the conversation is about, but your body language is showing everything. So I thought that was such a paramount moment of change for me, to make sure that, not to assume that I'm a great communicator, is to make sure that I can communicate calmly and not bottling things up and to wait for explosion. Because I always wonder in the past, as when I work for bigger companies, I do get the comments like, "Oh, Elle, I don't want your job." And I'll be like, "What? Oh my God!" Like, geez, yeah. I was like, and over the slowly, obviously, I could see how I could make it impossible for people to succeed my role or a particular business plan. And such a dangerous game, because I can feel that I'm entrapping myself in a particular role, and the frustration sets in when I'm no longer growing, and then more self-criticism will
never ending.
It's a vicious cycle. And I think that you're right in terms of evaluating, what is achieved, what results are we trying to achieve here, where perfection actually leads us to no end. You can't further do something that is already done well.
Yeah, 100%. And I think you've got to just define what your version of good enough actually looks like. Because again, for everybody, it's very, very different.
Yeah.
And you've got to get into that habit of saying, if I do this, am I actually going to get the result? It's all about the result, ultimately. It's about understanding what your outcome needs to be. And like, am I still going to get the good result? Yes, I am. By doing this slightly differently. My path to get there is just going to be slightly different, but I'm still going to get the great result. I'm still probably going to get that recognition that I'm looking for as a result of creating the result. I'm still going to feel accepted as a result without the burnout.
Yeah, totally.
Without the kind of dismay and that downward cycle and like you're describing.
And I like your comment about, let's not focus on ourselves. Perhaps changing the language from I to we, our objective, our results, that will actually create consciousness of, okay, what do other people want as well, other than us assuming that we are so great that we can see the end results. But what's end result without people around you?
Absolutely, because it can be lonely. Being a kind of a perfectionist can be really lonely because you have such high vision. I'm not going to say the word standards or expectations. I'm going to say vision of how things need to be, and it's kind of one way or the highway.
Yes.
And the truth is, there's 500 ways to cut a cake, right? And just because somebody else does it slightly differently, you still get the same outcome. You still slice the cake.
Yeah, totally. And I think
that's the thing, is to know that there are lots of ways that the same outcome can be achieved.
Yeah, totally. And I absolutely love that, because I think having that conversation prior, I think there'll be incidents, there'll be occasions and opportunities whereby people will say, you know what, we really need you to lead this. Don't worry, we'll support you. I mean, those are the great case studies whereby you can really go hell for leather, right? Like, let's go for it and let's run. Let's do your perfectionist, because you're needed for that scenario. But before we just, shoot and run, is to really analyze and say, okay, is this what we want? And what everybody wants, and who's to lead, who's to support, who's to follow, and who's to talk, and who's to action. And I think the role playing and clarification really will help us from the over criticism, where our thoughts and ideas become unrealistic.
Yes, absolutely.
And I know that you've got a special treat for our community, where there's only a one-click link away from accessing your 17 creative strategies to own your value and steer your career. Do you want to talk a little bit about perhaps one of the strategies within these 17 that you're kindly offering to in a PDF document format to our community?
Absolutely. It was my pleasure to offer some lovely content to your members. So I think the point, I think it's tip number 8 in the document that you can download, is really, really useful in this sense of perfectionism, which is to stay focused on the result rather than the work itself. So I think we can become obsessed, if you like, with the doing of the job, doing of the work, and being seen to be doing also, so that people see you working late, see you kind of putting in the hours. But the reality is people don't really care about how you get to the results, as long as you get the results. So as long as you kind of define that result as being something that is, sensible, good enough, it's good enough for me to get a good outcome, and then I can move on to the next thing and progress, keep moving. You don't want to stagnate and get into that analysis paralysis space. You want to focus on what's the result first. What outcome do I actually want? And you might find that by outsourcing some of the work, delegating some of the work out, can actually speed up that process as well and take some of the pressure off you. So I think, focusing on outcomes rather than on what needs to happen now and getting all into the detail is a really, really good tip.
Brilliant. Love it. I think the 3 episode has really anchored a good start to year 2021. Whether it's certain or uncertainty, I'm sure if we take the opportunity to align our minds, leverage on your 17 creative strategy to own our value, I'm sure you will steer us to a bright future. So thank you, Rebecca, on behalf of our community. Your contribution to our mental fitness is so important.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.